Kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. So good to be with you. What do you notice that might be slightly different tonight? Joey's got a work to do on. He might duck his head in later on, but he's not with us for the start of the show. You might see him in the chat. You might see him pop in. You might not see him at all. It's one of those things when work does happen. How you all doing? Hope you're well. Everything. Evening, Brother Monk. Nice to see you there. Evening, Ella. Evening. Oh, Brother Monk said evening twice, unless I just read it twice. Simple. Evening all. Evening, Kiwi Rascal. All you people in the chat there haven't got. Hey, Kiwi Skirt. Hey, Citizen Gold. Very interesting show tonight. I know it's going to be interesting because I've got two interviews that I've already done. So we are going to speak with we have already spoken with the president of the New Zealand Police Association, the union, you might say, for the police. We talked a bit about this last night. We said we'll be covering off this tonight, which we will. Just to put it in front of you before we start, though, the Darlene Tana conversation, which we began last night, we will actually get to in more detail tomorrow. There's just so much going on at the moment, especially with this Trump stuff, that we've only got enough time to do like 3 stories. We're not going to stay here till midnight every night and keep on doing them. We could if we wanted to, but we're not going to. So Darlene Tana will certainly be tomorrow night's conversation as part of that show. I've requested to speak to someone from the Greens, and we'll have a really good in-depth look as to what's happening and what's going on there. But tonight we're going to talk about the offer that has been accepted by the police to increase wages, salaries, conditions for the police that led 3 News to say the police are going to quit en masse. You can't actually strike if you're the police, which is an interesting situation. I get it. I understand. But, you know, doctors can strike. And if there was a super serious, you know, mass event that needed, the doctors can strike. I get it why the police can't strike in theory, because, you know, anyone who wanted to do something criminal would know exactly when a good time to hit every place was. But because they can't strike, if they're unhappy with the deal that, not that they've just been offered, but that's been accepted, then really the only thing they can do is quit. TV3 said last night that there is going to be a mass quitting of police. We want to talk to the association about that. Once again, what we find is we get answers sometimes out of people that I think are mainstream media worthy, and no one's getting it. So I've already sent this out as a clip on Twitter, so you may have already seen it, but talking to Chris Cahill this afternoon, I asked him, so you get how it works, right? The commissioner of the police, it's basically the number one, the top police officer. He's a police officer, he or her goes through the ranks, becomes the commissioner. So they're a police officer that started at the bottom, as Drake said, and they go all the way to the top. And I asked Chris Cahill if the commissioner, the number one cop in New Zealand, was working on behalf of the police officers, or was he an agent for the government in accepting this? And without question, he said he's an agent for the government. And I actually think that's a massive story. Like, if that's what is being publicly said by Chris Cahill, because I prompted him, I asked the question, then that's actually really, really big. It's an accusation that says the top cop in New Zealand is on the side of the government and their financial restrictions over and above the police officers. You'll get to see that. We're going to do that first. Also, we want to talk about the Trump situation as well. There's just been such a lot of shit in the last 24 hours. Oh my goodness. And apparently now, and I'm seeing it all over my Twitter feed, which is fine, it's finally come to light that how violent the left really are. It's just like an unfathomable amount of Dunning-Kruger needs to be in place for that to be true. But I want to show you some stuff tonight that just to I was going to say to arm us. You can't even say that now without having, multiple meanings behind it. That will give us some information that should we come up against these conversations in our own daily lives, it will help you. And also definitely want to have a look at JD Vance. We'll have a quick look at that as well. And then we're going to end the show tonight. We talked about this a couple of nights ago. No, last night? A couple of nights ago. There was we did this last week when we looked at the Tama Potaka conversation, because he was on with Mahendrangi Forbes on Mata, and they were talking about this document that some of the most esteemed language translators of Māori to English, like translators, licensed translators, have been telling ACT, this is not correct. Your translation is not correct. So when we're really sick, if you're really, really bad, if you've got the worst kind of sick, whatever it is, let's say you've got very bad cancer, then you want to go to the most qualified expert, the oncologist. The number one oncologist in the country is who you'd want to go to. If you're building a new house, in an ideal world, you want to go to the best builder you can get your hands on, the most professional, most qualified builder to build your house. This government, and in particular ACT, when they want to pass policy, they seem to want to not go to any experts and make shit up on the fly. And that's what's happening with the principles, the referendum for the principles of the treaty, is they're just making shit up. It's a very interesting conversation, and we'll check that out tonight. It'll be on YouTube tomorrow if you want to share it around. But also, if you are indeed a patron, well, kia ora, thank you for being a part of what we do. That looks funny when there's just one person there. Why didn't I do this one? Yeah, it looks better. If you're already a patron, then you probably already see it. There's the conversation with Chris Cahill sitting right there. So I expect like half of the live chat will just disappear tonight because you might have already seen it. And there's the conversation with Melanie Nelson, the licensed Māori translator on the Treaties Principle Bill. I think we're going to try and do a meetup this Saturday. I have to check my diary. But I think that's what we're going to try and do. So if you're a patron and you want to be a part of a meetup, it's obviously a virtual meetup because we literally have people supporting us from all over the world. We have patrons from all over the world. Then we'll make available a link. Maybe do that tomorrow. I might even do it tonight for us to have a meetup on Saturday morning, 11 a.m. New Zealand time, if you happen to be international. And also, obviously, the main reason people become patrons of this is to support us in what we're doing. There's some bonuses along the way, and there's some bits and bobs you get, which is great. But mostly and mainly, it's to support the work we're doing, which we genuinely appreciate, and it does definitely make a difference. And of course, you get to be in the credits at the end of the show. I should probably also say of the credits, just a reminder, you've got about 2 weeks if you want to try and win $500. We have $500 giveaway, $500 cash to give away for someone writing us a new theme song. Remember, it is a competition. So if you put dozens of hours into something and it ends up not winning, you just need to be aware that your dozens of hours are to enter a competition, not necessarily get paid. We've had a couple of entries come through, and I'm sure there's going to be more to come, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. You've got till the end of July should you want to do that, and should you want to be a part of what we are doing. I think that we should start by having a look at the police. Now, after I'd had my chat this afternoon with Chris Cahill, this popped up in my feed. I retweeted this and then said, I wonder if this includes all the police officers who apparently are going to be quitting after the last pay offer. Well, not pay offer, it's been accepted. Christopher Luxon, I guess this is on TikTok because it's portrait, but it's on his Twitter feed that I'm reading it. We're delivering 500 new police officers over 2 years, and that means more cops out on the beat. I wonder if there is a mass exodus, and I guess that's the accusation, it's not a reality yet. I wonder if his 500 new police officers includes that. Let's hear what he had to say today.
Well, nobody should go to work worrying whether their store is going to be robbed or ram-raided. I'm sick of it, Kiwis are sick of it, and it's unacceptable. And that's why our government has ramped up our actions to keep Kiwis safe and to make New Zealand a much tougher place for anyone involved in crime. So you'll be seeing some fresh faces on CBD streets, with beat officers having already been deployed at the start of this month in Auckland to help police to reduce crime and, importantly, improve public safety. It's all part of our plan to restore law and order and to get New Zealand back on track. Well,
So there you go. That popped up in my feed after I'd done the interview, and I just thought, gosh, it's interesting that would happen to pop up right about now, because there's a sector of the police that aren't happy, and we're going to start the show. Now, this is a pre-recorded conversation, obviously, but I will be in the studio and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you want to do chats, it may get put up during the topic of conversation, but obviously as it's a pre-record, there's nothing I can really do for you to have it be interactable for you. You understand what I'm saying. All right, let's get to the conversation. This is me having a chat with the president of the Police Association. It's Chris Cahill on what police are feeling around this pay deal at the moment. And we want to welcome to the show the president of the New Zealand Police Association, Chris Cahill. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, kia ora.
Kia ora. As the public, we're getting such mixed messages that the incumbent government is talking about lots of ways they're supporting the police, 500 additional officers, more powers put in place, more feet on the street. And then we're getting this other message where we're hearing that the police aren't happy with how they're being treated financially or being offered financially, salary-wise and stuff. I want to play a story from 3 News with you, but just before we go there, do you want to speak to the kind of bigger picture first of all?
Yeah, well, I think that you've identified the bigger picture. There's a lot going on in the police space around demand, about the extra work they're required, the new laws that are coming in, the challenges that will prevent. That's one of the issues police officers have. They don't believe there's any recognition for that in the latest pay deal. It's not just about, inflation. It's about how the job's expanding.
Yeah. Let's have a look at this story together. You're actually in the story. I'm not going to play the bits that you're in. That'd be a bit blimmin' Inception, wouldn't it? Watching you, talking about you, then coming back and talking to you. But I'll just play a couple of clips. It's only about 2 minutes total, just to get a feel for what the news story is all about. Here we go.
Police officers are threatening to quit en masse after losing their long-running pay dispute with the government. The final arbitration ruling was released today and will see police officers accept a $5,000 pay rise backdated to November, along with a $1,500 lump sum payment. Senior political correspondent Jenna Lynch has the details.
Society's safety net fraying. Many police officers are feeling undervalued, burnt out, fed up, and today got a further kick in the guts. The government won its pay dispute with the force.
Did police?
Like that, we're not stopping to talk to Tiki, but that in and of itself, the government won. So when someone wins, that means someone loses, but we'll get to that at the end of this conversation.
Push the government hard enough to get the money that you needed to pay cops what they're worth.
I believe the government has given a really fair package for New Zealand Police to work with in offering what we did.
The Police Association had been locked in a standoff with the government. Final arbitration was the last step. Police officers legally cannot strike. The arbitrator chose the government's offer over the unions.
Then you come on to have a lovely little chat, so we'll leave that one just there and just jump forward to after you speak and have about another 60 seconds. So we've got a full synopsis or snapshot of what we're talking about. Here we go.
The officers get a $5,000 pay rise backdated to November with an extra 4% backdated to the start of this month. There was also a $1,500 lump sum payment and overtime pay of time and a half.
Do you think it's fair?
Well, I think New Zealand Police is a rewarding place to work. Our job is exciting. We know that as we do more advertising, people are wanting to join, and they join for more than just pay.
Would you join police today on that salary?
Absolutely. My son has just joined in the last few weeks.
One officer told 3 News the government can always find money for stuff they want. Ukraine, nurses, teachers, national supporting police is just hot air. Wow. Another said, I'm at a loss for words. I feel completely disheartened and not at all valued. I will be looking for another job outside of the police. While a third told us the morale is already low and it just took another hit. The officer warned it would lead to people quitting en masse.
Resignations en masse. Are you scared that you might see that?
Well, surely that's a concern. We don't want people to leave. We believe that the offer is a fair offer in the circumstances that New Zealand finds itself in.
A leaked email from Police Commissioner Andrew Costa to staff suggests one way of easing the pressure would be to allow greater flexibility around the rate of superannuation contributions. He says they're considering letting officers stop paying their mandatory 7.5% contribution.
And then you go on to, there you are in your lovely face, talk about that means they're basically paying for their own pay increase, which seems ridiculous. So now that we've looked at it, can we just get an idea as to what kind of money we're talking? Like, what's the overall budget? Like, what's in the budget? What does the government spend on police total?
Yeah, look, it's a lot. It's getting up towards $2.7 billion a year. So it is a lot of money. But it probably should be recognised as a percentage of GDP, percentage of government spending. That's actually dropped over the last few years. It hasn't gone up.
Right.
But it is a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot of money. But if you were a landlord, for example, this government would be giving you more than the total budget they spend on police back. So, as one of the officers said, if they want to find money to give to Ukraine, I personally I don't think that's a bad thing either. But they seem to be able to find money for their passion projects. The police aren't one of them that would appear from this government. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think that's spot on. That's what we said in our submissions. I mean, one of the key submissions police made is that if our position was accepted, police wouldn't have the budget for it, and they might have to consider laying further police employees or non-sworn staff off. But that's the same. That's a choice governments make. They chose to give landlords $2.9 billion of tax relief. They chose to introduce $14.2 billion of tax relief to the general public as well. And I'm sure some people like that, but those choices they made, and they could equally make the choice to fund the payoff we wanted.
Yeah, and that's the thing we've been saying, Chris, constantly, is that people who can hold this government account, journalists with access, need to keep going, well, let's talk about your choices. You're choosing here, you're not choosing there. The story from 3 News talked about police are threatened to quit en masse, but within the story, it seems that they were saying one officer has said that people will commit en masse. It's a slightly different perspective on each of those. What's the feedback you're getting from police when it comes to the pay negotiations?
Yeah, look, one of the things that did come out, the idea that we've had mass exodus to Australia isn't actually the case. There's a bit of blurred around how many have actually gone, and it certainly seems to have picked up. But you're still not talking, hundreds by any stretch of the imagination. You're talking tens. But anecdotally, we're being told by a lot of officers they're waiting to see what this pay offer delivered before they make an informed decision. And if it doesn't deliver substantial change, then Australia is an option they'll be looking at. So I think we just have to monitor that over the next few months to see how many vote with their feet. Without a doubt, Australia is an attractive option. Policing is actually pretty similar in the majority of Australian states. I think Northern Territory probably a lot more challenging, but they do earn up to 30% more pretty much straight away before we talk allowances.
And forgive me for my ignorance, but wasn't there a better pay offer previously and this one's not as good?
Yeah, not anymore. Yeah, originally last year there was what we call the public service pay adjustment with some additions on it. Then when the new government came in, they made what we call a lowball offer. But no, they did up that offer, and so the offer that's now been accepted by the arbitrator is a better offer than that. And look, It's not the worst offer police have ever had, but it has to be looked in the context of a few things.
The other thing, I guess, looking from the outside in, Chris, is the acting police commissioner, as was featured in that story, I guess seems to be kind of going, yes, the government's done well, but it sounds like what you're saying and maybe the feedback from the actual boots on the street are saying not so good. I mean, was it Andrew Costa, I believe, that we saw?
Jim McSkimming, the deputy commissioner.
The acting, you're right. Okay, the deputy police commissioner. Are they fighting on behalf of the police, or are they agents of the government at this stage with this negotiation?
Very much agents of the government, without a doubt. They've got a set of directions from the government, from Public Service Commission, Treasury, and they follow that line. And that's one of the frustrations for us, that we're in a room negotiating, and really we're not negotiating with the organ grinder who's really back in those government agencies. We'd like to see them in the room in future.
So would it be fair to therefore say the top cop in New Zealand is arguing for the government, not for the police officers that they are a top cop for?
Yes, I think from our perspective, it's fair. I mean, I'm sure he would like to get more money, but he has to toe the government line, and the government line is around fiscal prudence, shall we say. He's had to accept what PSC and Treasury have said, and he's then presented that line in negotiations. Look, I think it's important just to note, what are the issues with the pay round that a lot of people will look at it and say it doesn't seem that bad. Yep. And one of the things that makes it look good is the 4% that we will get next July, when inflation is forecast to be a lot lower than 4%, as low as 2% now. One, we're living in the hope that economists predict something right for a change.
Yeah.
But we don't dispute that outlier year is a good offer. The problem is that the previous offer doesn't reflect how far officers fell behind when inflation was 7% and 6%. They fell in those 2 years more than 6% behind inflation. So they think, we should have at least been able to keep even with that. The second issue is there's no recognition here above inflation for the increasing demands. A lot more, if we look at just two issues, mental health, 70% increase in mental health call-outs in the last 5 years, 70% pretty much the same for family harm incidents. You've got doubling of gang members. You've got all the new legislation, the complex role they have to do, the dangers now. They believe there should have been an uplift for that, and there's no uplift in this position.
Last question, and actually it's a question that you've just reminded me of. I read something yesterday, I think, that said that the budget for the cops on the street, the new initiative that the government's bringing out, they're getting the money from the family harm budget. Can you speak to that? Is that accurate, inaccurate? Is there a bit of some truth to it?
I think, no, it's probably a bit confusing. I think what they're probably saying is they hope to free up staff from tending all these family harm incidents to be available for beat. Technically, the budget for them is new money. The problem is it's going to take at least 2 years for that to flow through, and in the meantime, staff have to be found from somewhere else. So it's shifting priorities around.
Gotcha. Now that they have the pay offer in front of them, you said that lots of the police officers were probably waiting to see what would happen. Is your expectations that we will lose a number of police over this pay offer? Or do you think it's been a hard negotiation, we'll now get on with life?
Well, look, a lot of it we'll have to wait and see. Certainly, if social media is to be believed, we will lose a lot of police officers. But talking and doing, they're two different things. It's a big move to uproot, move to Australia, leave your whānau. So we'll just have to see how that unfolds. But I certainly acknowledge that a lot of them with big mortgages, high rents, are still under pressure.
That is the president of the New Zealand Police Association, Chris Cahill. Chris, thanks so much for sparing us a few minutes today.
Thanks very much.
So there you go. That was the conversation there. I was keeping an eye on the chat as much as I could. Before we do that, Kiwi Bird wanted to ask the question, didn't ACT use Google Translate to do their referendum? Or not the referendum yet. That's what's going to come, apparently. That's the next step will be the referendum, but the bill on the treaty principles. That was good. Thank you. Well done. Yes, look, what we try and do here is just, you know what we do. We try and be the dumbest in the room, bring in the experts. When it's a blowhard conversation, me and Chewy can handle that. When you want to bring in the experts, you bring in the experts. Very appreciative for your super chat there, Nick. Very generous, $10 late today, also yesterday's. And speaking of blowhards, we're going to talk about Donald Trump in a second. Did I miss a joke? I apologize. I see that in the chat. I missed a joke. Okay. Let's just keep on trucking, shall we? Because the last conversation we're going to have tonight with one of the signatories for the open letter on the Treaty Principles Bill is a good chunk of time. So I want to give that enough time. But right now I also wanted to have a bit of a chat about Donald Trump and Donald Trump's running mate, JD Vance. There's a lot to get through in this, but it won't take a long time. Trust me, this will be well worth it once we get there. Let's have a look at the announcement today. This will only play for a short amount of time. Oh, see, when I do this by myself, I can't reach to the other side of the desk. Can I move that a little bit? Oh, sheesh. Everything's too far away from each other now. Oh, we'll see how this goes. This is just a little bit off my news, just 60 seconds showing Donald Trump with his, you know what? Okay, here's a prediction, right? I haven't seen this yet, but here's my prediction. I bet you $5 that you will see supporters of Donald Trump putting white plasters on their ears as a sign of support. You heard it here first. I bet you it'll happen. Wait and see. Right, this is Donald Trump arriving at the RNC today.
Arriving on stage to what's become his own personal anthem. The former president was in a room full of support.
He's a very strange man. And look, you know, I think that there's we give due respect to the history-making horrific event that happened Sunday New Zealand time. That doesn't mean we can't go, I don't understand this man's face. He doesn't seem to be able to just stand there and receive applause. It's the smirk, it's the sight, it's very bizarre.
The crowd echoing his words from the aftermath of this weekend's shooting. The bandaged former president didn't speak. He's scheduled to do so later in the convention, but he took his seat in the stands alongside his family and the man who will be his running mate for the White House.
Yep.
Senator JD Vance.
So there you go. JD Vance has been decided. It's been that's what's going to happen. Now there are some problems with JD Vance. There are lots of problems with JD Vance. One of them is he has had quite a long history of hating Trump, but it is worse than that. Let's have a look at a little bit of JD Vance's best ofs. Here's a little 30-second scroll, I think, from MSNBC.
Well, you know, Senator, this is an evolution, and I know you've been asked about this before, about past comments that you've made about Donald Trump. You've said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him. Terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible.
I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
And we've got a few more for you. So here's this first clip is JD Vance on Donald Trump.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. It makes you think that at a fundamental level, this is sort of a he said, she said, right? And at the end of the day, do you believe Donald Trump, who always tells the truth? Just kidding. Or do you believe that woman on that tape?
I cannot stand Trump because I think he's a fraud. Well, I think he's a total fraud that is exploiting these people, who is a total fraud.
Like you said, I agree with you on Trump because I don't think that he's the person. I don't think he actually cares about folks.
So as a conservative who thinks that Trump does not have the answers and isn't qualified to be president, what are you going to do this election, if you don't mind saying?
My current plan is to vote either third party or, as I joke to my wife, I might write in my dog because that's about as good as it seems. But, you know, I think there's a chance, if I feel like Trump has a really good chance of winning, that I might have to hold my nose and vote for Hillary Clinton.
Could you imagine Donald Trump having on his ticket someone who thought they might vote for Hillary Clinton? The animosity between those two. Oh, my goodness.
Ultimately, I think I'll probably vote third party. I might vote for this new guy who I really like, Evan McMullen, who I actually met the other day. But I think that I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. He's leading our political discourse to a very negative place.
Yeah.
If Trump is elected president,
the thing is, he's right, isn't he, about all of this? He's correct in his assessment, yet now he'll flip 180 because it serves his purpose.
he has to be a much different president than he was a candidate. As a candidate, he was fundamentally divisive, arrogant.
All right, I got another round for you now. So those were his views on Donald Trump. These are his views on the abortion issue. And this may actually, now look, we were very clear last night. It feels like it's Donald Trump's to lose, although it's, 4 months out. We'll wait and see. But at the moment, with the events of the last 48 hours, where he may get pushback is still the Roe versus Wade. And this is JD Vance's thoughts around abortion. And it's pretty horrific.
I think two wrongs don't make a right. At the end of the day, we're talking about an unborn.
The two wrongs, by the way, are being raped or being the victim of incest. That's one wrong. And the other one is aborting the fetus. Those are the two wrongs he's equating.
Baby. What kind of society do we want to have? A society that looks at unborn babies as inconveniences to be discarded?
Should a woman be forced to carry a child to term after she has been the victim of incest or rape?
Look, my view on this has been very clear, and I think the question betrays a certain presumption that's wrong. It's not whether a woman should be forced to bring a child to term, it's whether a child should be allowed to live, even though the circumstances of that child's birth are somehow
inconvenient or a problem to the society. The question really to me is about the baby.
Inconvenient or a problem to society if a female is raped. And the last one, I believe, starts off with his views now and do link into things like Project 2025. So you've had the pre-Trump Never Trumper, you've had the views on where he sits on abortion, and now this is sort of the current views. And I've seen the word bootlicker in the chat quite a few times. That part of JD Vance.
Project 2025. I reviewed a lot of it. There's some good ideas in there, Rob.
I tend to think that we should seize the institutions of the left and turn them against the left, right? We need like a de-Bathification program, but like a de-wokeification program in the United States, right? So like, let me give you a couple examples. So one of the things I've always been very sympathetic to is this idea that we don't have a real constitutional republic anymore. What we have is an administrative state, right? The administrative state controls everything, right? So to the point that like when Donald Trump wins, he can't even sometimes get his people in core positions of authority in the administrative estate. It's like, well, do we have a constitutional republic? The founding fathers actually created a very powerful chief executive, a very powerful president. But if he can't,
otherwise in other cultures known as a king. So he's basically talking about the president having immunity and absolute power. Keep listening.
Even fire the people in his own administration. Like, is this really a successful republic? So a lot of conservatives have said we should deconstruct the administrative state. We should basically eliminate the administrative state. And I'm sympathetic to that project. But another option is that we should just seize the administrative state for our own purposes. We should fire all of the people. I mean, I think Trump is going to run again in 2024. I think he'll probably win again in 2024. And he'll win by a margin such that he will be the president of the United States in January of 2025. I think that what Trump should do, like if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And when the courts, because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Because this is, I think, a constitutional level crisis.
So there you go. President should do whatever he wants. And look, this has been the fear for Donald Trump the whole time. It's like he gets his lackeys in and around him, and but that's JD Vance, right? I don't know the word to use which puts it on the serious nature of his views around abortion. His lackeyness from going from a never Trumper to basically saying, when they elect President Trump, he should be able to do whatever he wants, however he wants, and then onwards and upwards. So that's the man. And remember as well, I mean, it's probably not appropriate to talk about a president passing away now, but a 77-year-old man may pass from natural causes. This average life expectancy is about 79, I think, or 80 in America. So there's every chance that you're looking at then the next president of the United States of America. Meaning if something should happen to Trump midterm, should he win. And those are the views in the White House that could be sitting in the Oval Office making those decisions. Something to think about. The other thing I wanted for us to show you, this is more about the events of the last 36 hours. And it does sort of involve JD Vance, but I don't know if you've been seeing it on your social medias, but I've been seeing it on my social medias about the violence from the left, the violence from the left, the violence from the left. When, the shooter was a registered Republican. Yes, as a 17-year-old, he gave $15 to a Democratic cause, but he was a registered Republican who all of the people who knew him at school when they were doing thought exercises about politics, he always went to the conservative side. So I don't know how they get the left is so violent. One of the ways they're getting there is talking about the rhetoric. I know you're spitting your tea out. It's a double take. The rhetoric of the left leading to what's happened. So let's have a look at a little bit of that, because this is important for us to know, and it's important for us to be able to push back about should we need to. So I watched Piers Morgans stuff today, and he had on Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings, Ben Shapiro, but he plays a piece, a mashup, I think he calls it, of the left, quote unquote, the left, referencing Donald Trump as Hitler. And he says it, the left have to stop calling Donald Trump Hitler. All right, I'll play it first and then we'll continue on. So this is Piers Morgan's evidence for how all of the left call Donald Trump Hitler.
I've got a mashup here of people on the left calling Trump Hitler. Let's take a look.
Right, people on the left calling Trump Hitler.
Many are openly comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler.
Trump's been compared to the German
That was many are comparing, right? That wasn't him saying it.
dictator by some throughout his presidential campaign.
That person's not doing it.
Is Donald Trump really a fascist?
Maria Chappelle-Nadal posted this picture to Twitter yesterday. It appears to compare Donald Trump to Hitler.
Former President Trump doubles down on a phrase many say he borrowed from Hitler.
President borrowed a phrase from Hitler, necessarily comparing him to Hitler.
Fantasyland decided to take a page out of Adolf Hitler's playbook last week.
Yes, Donald Trump took his Hitler cosplay to the next level.
Do you want to clear the air because you think you're being unfavorably compared to Donald Trump?
A unified Reich? That's Hitler's language. That's not America's.
New York's Daily News ran this front page earlier this week. Trump is Hitler.
According to the Washington Post, Trump has long toyed with the language of fascists.
Former President Donald Trump allegedly praised Adolf Hitler, saying the Nazi leader had, quote, done some good things.
So in all of that, yes, there were some people who said he is Hitler. Most of that was saying things like they're comparing him to Hitler. Some are. He's using the language of Hitler. There was some in that. Now, there was one person in there that you may not know, Maria Chappelle-Nadal, or Chappelle-Nadal. She used to be a politician. According to this, she hasn't been a politician since 2021. Because that's also really important to remember. Let's just give baby his bottle, and let's just say that there's a comparison, putting him in Hitler's camp. Who said it in all of those clips? Commentators, comedians, shock jocks, podcasters, announcers, right? People who are talking about what people are talking about. But what isn't there in there? There's no politicians doing it. The point they're making is if you compare someone to Hitler for long enough, a deranged person might go, I'm going to take them out, because of course you'll take out Hitler. I have to ask you this question, people. If you knew someone was a paedophile or a groomer, couldn't you make the same argument? If you convince someone for long enough that such and such is a groomer or such and such is a paedophile, isn't that exactly the same thing? You've just seen Piers Morgan's best case scenario mashup for people comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. I'm now going to play you something we played last night. And guess who's doing the same from the right? It's not just the commentators and stuff. It's people in Congress. It's people in the Senate. You know who else it is? It's the presumptive, is that the right word? Potential deputy vice president of the United States of America, JD Vance. So you've just seen the left be represented by commentators, podcasters, comedians, announcers. And now let's see the right and how they portray the left with words that, if taken by a deranged person, could lead to violence.
There have been a number of Republicans who, without skipping a beat, have exploited these events to attack Joe Biden or the Democrats. Mike Collins, a Republican lawmaker from Georgia, tweeted, "Joe Biden sent the order." Marjorie Taylor Greene wrote, "We are in a battle between good and evil. The Democrats are the party of pedophiles, murdering the innocent, unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless and endless wars."
Pedophiles, murderous, endless wars. Surely a deranged person could take those words and go, we must do something to stop these people at all costs. Of course we want to stop a pedophile. You know, of course, we have to do that.
The Democrat Party is flat out evil, and yesterday they tried to murder President Trump. JD Vance wrote, "Today is not just some isolated incident. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs."
Hang on. Piers Morgan just put up an issue that people were calling Donald Trump a fascist, like podcasters, comedians, and announcers. Here is Donald Trump's running partner calling Joe Biden a fascist. I thought this was what led to the potential shooting of Donald Trump, when all those comedians and podcasters and citizens, but what if the people in the halls of power are actually saying those things?
That rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. And of course, Lauren Boebert posted this.
I do believe that Joe Biden is responsible.
What you'll enjoy most from this, people, is her eyes darting off when she has to read her script again because she can't speak a straight sentence. You watch her eyes shoot off to the left of the screen as I look at reading the script.
For the shooting today, Kyle Clark, an innocent supporter of President Trump, someone who loved President Trump and was there exercising their right to support him, lost their life today. Everyone who has called him a fascist, everyone who has called him a threat to democracy, who said that he should be put in a bullseye, as Joe Biden said, they need to have some very deep reflection tonight before another tragedy like this takes place.
There you go. So everyone who called him things like Hitler and she didn't say Hitler, but a fascist, and even though Piers Morgan did his best to try and smear the left, calling him Hitler, but didn't use any examples of politicians, there is certainly one person who did call Donald Trump Hitler, and that's his fucking running mate. JD Vance called him America's Hitler. So if we're looking at everybody who's used these kinds of words against Donald Trump as somewhat responsible for what happened to Donald Trump, or with the shooting, then JD Vance has to be on that list by nature, because he called him America's Hitler. These are the things we need to know, people. These are the things we need to know. Right, let's get to some super chats, and then we're going to go on to the last part of the show. I think this is about JD Vance. I reckon he steals his wife's eyeliner. Peter says, oh, sorry, that was from Junk Rig Sailor. Peter says, is there anything that can cheer us up? This is also very bleak. I'll try and turn my dog cam on, because Nala's in the studio with me. Late Fee says, Bill B, watching Bodie Strike Force 4. Bodie? Beauty. Strike Force 4. It's not a baby. I thought you said Bodie, like I was thinking I still had rugby in my head from the weekend. Some people are talking about conspiracy theory. Some people are thinking that Chewy's run away tonight because I talked a bit of rugby last night. It's not the case. So people, whānau, friends, we all know of the situation that's happening with the ACT Party. The ACT Party is wanting to run a referendum or pass a bill on the principles of the treaty. We watched Mahinarangi Forbes last week speaking with Tama Potaka about a letter that was signed by some of New Zealand's most esteemed and respected Māori translators. Melanie Nelson is one of those people. She was on that letter, she signed that letter, and she is one of the spokespeople for the group. I was incredibly lucky this afternoon to spend some time with Melanie, and had a good old chin wag about this. And I'll tell you what, we will be having her back because she is speaking in her position as the spokesperson for the signatories in this, but she is also a researcher of her own right, and she's looked at a whole bunch of other things as well, which you and I will find fascinating. We will have Melanie back on, but let's have a look now at the conversation from today that I had with Melanie about the letter they wrote to government, to ACT, as to the errors that ACT has in their treaty principles bill. I think that makes sense. Here's Melanie. Let's welcome to the show Melanie Nelson. Melanie is a licensed Māori translator and a spokesperson for the signatories to the open letter that was sent to the government saying, warning, warning, what ACT is saying is not accurate. It's my paraphrase, Melanie. I hope that's an okay paraphrase, but welcome to the show.
Kia ora. Thanks for inviting me on.
Rather than paraphrasing stupidly, tell us about the letter, tell us about what it's about and why a group of, what would you say, New Zealand's foremost experts when it comes to translation signed to it to send to the government?
It's 27 licensed translators and is a high standard to reach to be a licensed translator. And many of them are really well known.
Right.
So, yeah, we have sent a letter to the government, to the Prime Minister and several key ministers, because we're so concerned at the inaccuracies contained in the proposed treaty principles for the Treaty Principles Bill. And we had a good look at it from a translator's perspective and can see that the international ethical standards of translation have been seriously breached, a number of those ethical standards in the proposed principles. So we felt it was our responsibility to our profession and to the languages involved and to the principle of truth to write this letter to ensure that the Prime Minister and government are aware of these inaccuracies.
Yeah, also, I'm just going to acknowledge to people, thanks for joining us today because you're at the tail end of COVID. So I assume you're tired and you're recovering. So thank you for giving us some time as well. This is the letter. I just maybe will read the first paragraph so people know sort of where you guys are coming from. It's addressing the Prime Minister and ministers. We are highly concerned that ministers are using deeply flawed translations of Te Reo Māori in the treaty's principal bill. Doing so misrepresents foundational concepts, misinforms public discourse, does violence to a treasured and official language, and will cause serious long-term harm to national unity and confidence in good governance. Effective and responsible political debate and government actions should never be premised on misinformation. We encourage the Prime Minister to insist that all ministers uphold truth and accuracy as the most basic standards of good governance. I've got a bunch of other things highlighted in the letter, but I thought maybe what I'd ask you is, because you're talking about misrepresenting the foundational concepts. This is the bill as we look at it. I'm getting messages on places like Twitter, of course, with people saying things like, but if you read the bill, if you read what they're trying to do, what's wrong with that? And my response to them has been, but that's not an accurate translation. And the response back has been, well, be that the case or not, what's wrong with everyone being equal as actors trying to do? So maybe you could address for me and for the people in my incredibly healthy Twitter feed, not toxic at all, the idea of how important it is to have an accurate translation before we even get to, is this a good piece of legislation to implement?
Yeah, kia ora. So what you showed is the proposed treaty principles, which ACT campaigned on, and the ones they're promoting for inclusion in the bill. So we haven't actually seen the bill yet, but we were sufficiently concerned at the inaccuracies in the proposed principles to speak out now. And the issue here is that David Seymour and ACT Party have repeatedly stated that these proposed principles are what the Māori text of Te Tiriti actually says. And so that is the premise for these proposed principles, that they're based on what Te Tiriti actually says. And so that, of course, comes down to looking at the Māori text of Te Tiriti and seeing if that's actually what it says. So what we found when we did that is that the Māori text that you see in those proposed principles you put up, those partial phrases are extracted from the Māori text of Te Tiriti. They're taken out of context, and then that includes linguistic context, and they would have a different meaning, or actually a coherent meaning in that linguistic context, because these partial phrases don't even make sense on their own in Te Reo Māori. So they've been taken out of linguistic context, which gives them meaning, but also cultural and historical context. And so when you're doing translation, it's critically important, and a really core ethical standard is that you translate with regard to the actual and intended meaning of the text, and that you do that with regards to and in the context, all those different contexts that I've outlined. So that's been breached in the English principles that have been reached here, and also by the taking of the Māori phrases out of context. So our statement is that none of these proposed principles are truly present in the Māori text of Te Tiriti, and they're also not present in the English text of the treaty. But they've claimed to be taken from the Māori text, and what's happened is that they've taken a very small number of words, so 35 out of 170 words from the 3 articles of the Māori text of Te Tiriti, and then left things out, obviously, taking just that small number of words, added things in, and distorted the meaning. And so we come to this set of principles, which are claim to be what Te Tiriti actually says, and they're not. And so as translators, we can see that, and we're not the first to say that. Many Māori speakers and treaty experts have been saying that. But as translators, we have ethical standards to follow and processes that we follow. And so we've applied those processes. And for example, one is to back translate and find out to see if it actually goes back when you translate it back into Māori, to see that the concepts are still the same. And
like reverse engineering it from what they're saying to see what it would be.
Yeah. So if you translate something from Māori to English, you then back translate it into Māori to review and see if you've retained the very subtleties of meaning, which is so critical. And that's why we're speaking as translators, because around the world, the use of language in translation is key for transparency and integrity. And, you wouldn't want New Zealand to be taking out the key principles of a trade agreement with China that was in Chinese without involving Chinese interpreters and translators. And so that's a really basic standard that, government departments do follow good standards generally for translation and involve licensed translators and peer review and quality assurance processes that are really strong. And that's for good reason. You need things to say what they were intended to say when they appear in different languages. And it doesn't seem that those processes have been followed here. And so for legislation, it should absolutely be followed. That should be an even stronger process than for normal translations, and especially legislation which seeks to, change, it would change the meaning of over 50 laws and potentially also our constitutional arrangements. So it's very important and significant piece of legislation, and it needs to have a foundation of absolute truth and rigorous quality control.
Yeah, and that's when David Seymour comes out and goes, we're not touching the treaty. We're not touching the treaty. We're leaving the treaty alone. We're just looking at how you read the treaty. In other words, it's like, well, but that means you're looking at interpreting it a different way, which completely changes the meaning and context of the treaty. So you are touching the treaty. I've done a lot of study of ancient texts. Well, a lot. I'm exaggerating. Some study. And one of the, I think it's called hermeneutics, one of the things we do is we look at the context of the word as to what it meant in the day as well, because it may be different today. I guarantee you, if in 50 years before today or 50 years after today, if you look for the word fire, then that will mean probably, flames, open flames on a piece of wood. But it gets used in context today by some to mean this is the best option ever. So words change and they grow and they evolve as a part of unless this is just nefarious and unless actors just doing something they know is wrong to push through an agenda they want. If they're not doing that, if we're being gracious and just say they're wrong, are they missing a big part of what, for example, kawanatanga or tino rangatiratanga meant of the day, and they're putting a modern context and spin on it as to what they say it means today? Is this a part of it?
A good question. Yeah, so we're absolutely not ascribing intention. And, we've sent this letter in good faith so that they can know that this is not what Te Tiriti says, and that the Prime Minister and senior ministers now know that. So if they continue now on with this, then they're doing it intentionally with that knowledge. But we don't know what their process has been to date. So I think, I think you raised some important points around meanings of words. So another really significant and important ethical standard for translation is around cultural sensitivity and understanding the meanings of words within that cultural context. And that is one of the core issues here that we're raising, is that Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi guaranteed Māori, hapu rangatira, and all Māori people, the New Zealanders as they were called at that time. And so that's an important meaning, is that, is knowing that it was Māori who were called New Zealanders in 1840. There were only 2,000 Europeans here, and they primarily identified as British. So when Te Tiriti talks about New Zealanders or the Māori people of New Zealand, it's talking about Māori, the chiefs, tribes, and the respective people thereof. So that's one important contextual thing. And the other is that tino rangatiratanga is a really broad concept, and it's a Māori concept, and it needs to be understood within its cultural meanings. And the guarantee of tino rangatiratanga was to Māori, and that's very broad. It's around lands, villages, and all their treasures, which includes, cultural things such as te reo, for example. And so in the proposed treaty principle, tino rangatiratanga has been translated as chieftainship, which when you take that away from the actual context of te tiriti, that is a valid word potentially to use if you're referring to the full, the full context and meaning of te tiriti, but it's been used, transformed and distorted into chieftainship for all New Zealanders over all their land and property. And so it's really distilling it down to individual property rights and giving it to all New Zealanders. And that is really not what tino rangatiratanga is at all. And it's not what was guaranteed in the treaty. It's not individual property rights, it's Māori collective rights, that they would retain those existing rights. So it's a conflation to say that it's property rights, and then it's, I guess, reducing it to the point of meaninglessness to give it to all New Zealanders. We have our avenues for property rights, and Māori were guaranteed tino rangatiratanga, and those things sit along side by side. And to your point around, the equality, I think the treaty offers a pathway to genuine substantive equality, and that's, we have different roles based on a legal agreement that was made between the Crown and Māori hapu and rangatira, and so that is the foundation, and one party doesn't have the right to change that. So there are different rights, and we have different rights playing out all the time in our different relationships. But if an agreement is made, the meaning can't just be changed. It has to. You have to actually understand what the meaning was, and to hold to that agreement. We do that all the time in our lives.
It's interesting you talk about a legal agreement. We often, and we're just a couple of idiots from the bottom of the South Island, right? But I often try and think about the treaty like a contract, like a legal agreement between two parties. And now you've got ACT coming along going, that contract that you guys signed and you agreed to, well, we want to add all these people to the contract and give them exactly what the original signatories were. And I kind of liken it to, if you're in a new subdivision, and you're the first house to buy in a new subdivision, and you sign up to the agreement of the subdivision. And then when all the other plots get sold off, they have the availability to change your agreement for the first time. You're like, no, I've already signed my agreement. I signed it with the people selling it, and we've got an agreement. So I'm not going to now change my agreement to them based on all these other people coming in. And I don't know if that's oversimplifying it to a point of offensiveness, but it's it seems to me that it's, especially for a party like ACT, who claim things like property rights, et cetera, that it's a very clear contract of the rights come based on this agreement that was signed between two parties. I've got rights between me and my bank that my neighbour doesn't have and has no rights to, because I've made a contract between me and my bank. It doesn't mean that my neighbour gets exactly what I've got whilst jumping onto my property and taking some of that, square meterage as well. I mean, am I oversimplifying it, or is that an okay way to look at it?
Yeah, and I think looking at it as an agreement, a legal agreement, is critical, because it is, and it was an agreement between nations. So, and that hasn't changed. I think, I think your points about giving everyone what was guaranteed in the treaty, it's not even doing that. It's actually changing what was offered. So as I've outlined, it's changing tino rangatiratanga to property rights, which is a very narrow distortion of what tino rangatiratanga is. And the Article 3 proposed principle, Article 3 gives extends to Māori the rights of British citizens. And that's been really totally changed and distorted in this principle to say that all New Zealanders have the same rights and duties. And that's really a total reversal of the guarantees of the treaty. And I think we need to be clear too. I'm not sure if you saw the breakfast interview with Minister Seymour last week on our letter and the translation.
I didn't, sorry, no.
Yeah, but that was a really interesting interview, because Mr. Seymour, the interviewer challenged him on how he'd chosen which bits to utilise and in these proposed principles, and missed out so many words and so much meaning. And he said something along the lines of, well, the principles, are selected bits. It's not the full text. And so I think it's important to understand that the principles are actually not preferential extracts. They are the essence of Te Tiriti, the Māori text, and the Treaty of Waitangi, the English text. And it's the essence, the full meaning within context and the intended and actual meaning distilled down into principles. So the principles are not extracts. And the other thing, which was new information in that interview and a shift in how he was speaking about it, where he has previously, repeatedly said that these proposed principles are what Te Tiriti actually says, the Māori text. And he shifted in that interview to saying more, I've put forward a proposal of the values I think New Zealanders should live by today and the bits that are important. So more to saying this is actually what I want the treaty to mean today, which is sort of not really about what the treaty says. And so that's quite a different conversation to the conversation that has been being led, which is around this is what the Māori text of Te Tiriti actually says. And with anyone who can read it, saying, no, it's not what it says. And so, our message as translators is that we need to be very clear about what it actually says. And this bill is premised on being actual principles of what the treaty actually says. And so our message to the Prime Minister is that that these omissions, additions and distortions take the principles so far away from being anything to do with what Te Tiriti actually said that it shouldn't be entered into Parliament as a bill. And if it is, it really shouldn't state that this is what the treaty says, because that's extremely problematic to have fiction enshrined as fact in our legislation, and even to be going into debate and select committee, which the government did commit to do in the coalition agreement. But we need to be clear as well that this is a government bill. It's not a private member's bill. So the government, all three parties of the coalition, have to agree to what's included in the bill, as you'll see on ACT's campaign website there. So we also don't want to overly focus on ACT because it is a government decision ultimately, and the Prime Minister is responsible for that, for what the bill actually looks like, and whether or not it claims to be saying what the treaty says. So we've asked that if it is introduced, that there's a conscience vote is allowed, because this is a really big question for all New Zealanders around the principle of truth in our legislation.
I'll come back to the conscience vote because I was going to ask you about that. What you're basically saying, it sounds to me, is that David Seymour saying this is how I want the country to be. And to be honest, I couldn't think of anything worse than basing a country on David Seymour's principles and ideas around what it should be. Now, I know you don't need to speak to that because, I'm the guy who can pass opinions, and you guys probably don't want to get involved in that. I do want to ask you a question though. We've had Moana Tūwhare on a couple of times, and you mentioned that the meaning has flipped in this. It seems to me as well, from my very limited understanding, but seeking out expertise like yourself and Moana and other people, and Professor Margaret Mutu, who's been on with us, is that when these things were signed, in the 1800s, and the English, the British, Europeans were in such a minority, it was almost Māori welcoming, like co-governance. It was Māori saying to the British, you can come to the table. It was actually a way that Māori allowed the British to be involved, the English, the settlers to be involved. And as soon as, Pākehā became the majority, and including today, it's like, well, let's reverse all these things because we're in we're in the majority now and we can and we want it our way. Again, going back to that legal document, if your personal circumstances change, it doesn't mean you get to therefore change what this original agreement was. Are we thinking about this correctly? Are we seeing it correctly that once Europeans sort of became the majority, they're like, well, thanks very much for allowing us to the table, now we'll take over?
You're just, to your point initially about the resemblance of the principles to Act's preferences. So, we're limiting what we're speaking about, as you say, to our role as translators and
100%.
And that role. But we have noted in our letter that, because an important translation ethic is that there's no biases or preferences or personal interpretation entered into the translation. And although you wouldn't jump to that conclusion, obviously, because of all the evidence we've outlined about the various other breaches of the ethical standards of translation, and given that the proposed treaty principles are not derived from Te Tiriti, as it has been stated that they are, and that they actually look like ACT party political preferences and policies, we have noted that it's possible that the ethical standards of objectivity and impartiality have not been adhered to in this translation. In terms of that shift in the dominance, that's not something that we've addressed as translators, but if I could just switch to speaking for myself briefly, I'm a Pākehā New Zealander who's been fortunate enough to learn te reo and, develop a career in this space. And it'd certainly be my observation that, the Māori didn't really need, they were dominant. There was several 100,000 Māori at the signing of Te Tiriti, and so, it really was giving permission for, for the British to create government to manage their own people and processes. And the treaty guarantee was that Māori would retain tino rangatiratanga alongside. So, I think we are in a situation where obviously the power imbalance is very different these days. And so that leads to a very different conversation and situation and decision-making process, I guess. And so, my perspective would be that that's definitely playing out here, because, one party to the treaty changing the meaning and application of it without full agreement and engagement with the other party, that's not what you do in a legal agreement. And the power dynamics make that at least look like a political possibility at the moment, which is very concerning for anyone that's interested in good governance and upholding agreements.
Yeah, and I know, not to oversimplify it, I don't get to tell the bank that I've decided to change how my mortgage is structured without a conversation with them. It just seems a no-brainer to me. I want to play something for you because you've talked about it being a government bill, and the first time I've thought about that, that's really interesting. We've been saying for a long time, because Mr. Luxon invited some of these parties to the table to form a government, the way we've been wording it is, if anything breaks because you've let them through the door, Mr. Luxon, then you own it. But we've been saying it more in sort of a moral perspective, but you're saying this is literally a government bill because of how it's been set up. This is not just a you're allowing act to come through and do this. It's like you guys have to be in agreement to do this. And so I'm fascinated as to now, because this now that I'm thinking of it that way, this interaction between Hinerangi Forbes and Tama Potaka feels very different when she asks him about the bill, and he basically won't answer it, and he doesn't know who's translated it, and he won't say whether he agrees with your guys' letter or David Seymour. It's only about 90 seconds. I'll just play this for you.
And just to be clear on the just to be clear on, it's actually X campaign website which says that all three parties have to agree on the form of the bill, and the coalition agreement is that it will be progressed along the lines of what ACT campaigned on. But yeah, it does, they do need to reach that agreement, and it will be entered into Parliament as a government bill if it's entered, not as a private member's bill.
All right, so let's have a listen to this interaction.
What we've said, that's what we've committed to.
But do you think that the translations are inaccurate as our mātanga reo have stated in the open letter?
I think there are various translations given to
well, there's
the
three.
treaty.
There's three, and they're in the bill, and you would have seen them.
I've not seen the bill being presented yet. No, we know that there's a draft ACT policy, and I've not seen a bill.
Do you trust the likes of Te Haumihiata, Perepi Walker, Tātiri McLeod, Stacey Morrison, as our mātanga reo, who say that they are highly inaccurate and they are worried that this is going to be a bill that is going to Parliament?
I have seen the letter, and I'm very appreciative of the letter, and expressed some very genuine concerns. In addition, the National Party and the ACT Party have an arrangement, the coalition commitment, to take a bill forward.
Yeah, except that you are the Minister of Māori Development. Wouldn't Te Iwi Māori expect you to ensure that our reo is being handled, treated, translated to the utmost quality? I mean, do you even know who translated it?
I'm not aware of who within the ACT Party has been involved in doing this work.
Will you chase that up? Is that important to you?
This is very important to me.
So
it's
will you chase it up?
Important. It's very important to me to ensure that we follow through on our coalition commitments, but we also follow through on some of the concerns, genuine concerns and legitimate concerns that our mātanga reo have raised.
I guess one would say, what if you can't do both? What if you can't address the concerns and support the coalition? What does one do? Now, this brings me to another question about the conscience vote, which I'll do next. But would you like to speak to that? Would love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing as a government minister talking about this bill from a position of the one who should be protecting and uplifting and driving Māori policy through.
Yeah, the letter was to him amongst other senior ministers, and he is very expert speaker of Te Reo Māori and in Te Tiriti and treaty, and has a background working for iwi. So yeah, he absolutely would know what the treaty says in Te Reo and in English, and yeah, I think he should be very concerned about what the proposed principles are, and I hope that he's noted that the letter raises very real and legitimate concerns, and he did say somewhere else that it's a really important letter. So I hope that it's helping to enable him to have the conversations that he should be having with his colleagues to draw attention to these inaccuracies. And although it's easy to focus on ACT around this, actually the focus is perhaps more on national, because they could stand up stronger and say that this is not what Te Tiriti says and this is not what national represents or stands for. And although we've agreed to take it to this point, we strongly disagree with it. And they haven't said that. So, they have said that Christopher Luxon is stated as leader of the National Party, that National wouldn't support it past select committee. However, he made explicit that he was stating that as the leader of the National Party, not as Prime Minister, which could seem to leave the door a bit ajar for Prime Minister potentially requiring the government to take it further if needed. And we do know from written questions in Parliament that, as government resource in the Ministry of Justice that is developing the bill, and we also know from those written questions that those officials are continuing work on a referendum for the Treaty Principles Bill as part of the bill's development. So, a referendum's right at the end of multiple processes in Parliament. So it's very concerning that that's still being worked on, even though the leader of the National Party has said it won't be progressed further. So that seems to give some mixed messages about the situation, and that's extremely concerning given the inaccuracies in the translation.
And look, respectfully, that you won't speak to this, but the National Party has told such a lot of bullshit between what was pre-election to post-election. How can you believe anything they say? my opinion, today that they will or won't do. But that does bring me to this last question about your requested actions, which you've already mentioned today. And you've said allow a conscience vote by all members of Parliament on the treaty principle bills for all readings should it proceed to Parliament. We've been saying for the last 6 months or so that that's possibly the plan by National to get this through, as opposed to not, because I've done the numbers and I think, if you assume all of New Zealand First and all of ACT vote for this, then you have to get 43 out of the 49 National MPs to vote for it on a conscious vote, and then it would pass in government. We spoke to Tau Hanari, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, and he made it very clear when he was in the National Party, there was a lot of people then who would have absolutely done what they're looking at doing now. There just wasn't a climate for it. Do you not think that putting it to a conscience vote might actually be the thing that gets it through rather than perhaps the opposite?
Well, the government has agreed to take it through the first reading into select committee. And, we understand from various conversations that have been happening with National Party MPs that a lot of National Party MPs are not supportive of it. And so, if the first reading was a conscience vote, that would give the opportunity for National members to do the right thing and uphold the principle of truth for legislation. And I saw, I think it was yesterday that Hekia Parata had spoken out asking people to boycott, saying she supports a boycott of the Treaty Principles Select Committee. So, it is a complex question.
You're confident that, though, there'd be at least 7 National MPs under a conscience vote that wouldn't vote for it, because that's what would need to happen for it to fail. You're pretty confident that 7 or more would?
It is a complex question, and we're not hearing anything from the government that suggests they would make it a conscience vote. They've agreed to take it through to the first reading. So,
But that's how they get around it. That's how they get around. We only took it to the first reading, and then we made it a conscience vote, and then it has the possibility of getting through. But I look. I mean, gosh, when I looked at those numbers this morning, I thought, you probably have more than 7 MPs that wouldn't want it. You probably have a good chunk. But then that's me again, trusting the system and trusting what has been said. And we've already seen numerous examples of things that have been said last year that either aren't being done this year, or nothing that was talked about last year that is being done. Smoke Free 2025 is a perfectly good example. So I don't know. It makes me very nervous. I'm nervous for the country. I'm nervous for, people talking about this is the next 1981 Springbok tour, should it go forward. Very thankful for what you guys have done. And is there anything else you want to leave us with before we wrap up? Because I'm just going, it's great to have you on. It's very thankful for you giving us some time, especially from your COVID recovery, to explain the letter in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I guess just to reflect that it is incredibly complex, and it's a very complex situation. And I think, touching on what you just spoke to, I think the last thing we want to see is polarization and huge division. And so hopefully our letter has helped to increase some understanding and bring some awareness to what's foundational to the proposal, and that it is deeply flawed translation. So we hope that promoting that understanding and sharing our professional expertise with the government will help a small bit in this process.
It's just so bizarre. If you had cancer, you'd go to the most qualified doctor you could to get diagnosis. If you were building your house, you'd want to have the most qualified builder to make it a good job, and then when it comes to issues around Māoridom, they don't want to go to the experts. I mean, this government has said that they're literally not going to take official advice, that that their ministers will ignore it. And that question about who translated it for ACT, I think, is a massive thing that we need to know. And then they're going like, I'd go to the oncologist if I had cancer, but I'm certainly not going to what I'm calling the professionals who understand the Māori language when we're talking about translating the Māori language. It's just bizarre, Melanie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Melanie Nelson is a licensed Māori translator and a spokesperson for the signatories of the letter we've just been referencing. Have a good day. Get well, and thank you for your time.
Kia ora. Thank you.
All right, team, that's us. We are wrapped up. Yep, there are lots of comments that people enjoyed what you had, and lots of comments from people talking about this needs to be shared around, and like it'll be on YouTube at 6:30 tomorrow morning. So you in its entirety, and then I'll make some clips from it probably tomorrow, and they will be spread through the next 3 or 4 days. So follow me on Twitter. Follow me on the Twitter is the best way to get those clips, but some of those clips will also go back to YouTube as well. I forgot to talk about this during the conversation. I want to bring your attention to the idea that Melanie has a podcast as well. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I certainly will be signing up to it. It is called Weaving Our Worlds. Melanie Nelson seeks to foster mutual understanding between Māori and Pākehā in Aotearoa. Long-form conversations enable learning, insight, and positive change. Topics are diverse, ranging from te reo to the arts and te tiriti to the environment. So weaving our worlds. I'll try my best to remember to put that into the show notes, but if I don't, I've said it. And there you go. All done. Yep, so no Chewy tonight, as some people obviously noticed. He had some other work things on, and I guess because we had a couple of conversations like that, he would have been sitting around twiddling his thumbs for 45 minutes anyway, so it works well. Raywin, just on the end of that I was trying to put chats up as we went through, and if there were some super chats, I tried to put those up as well, so they're already done. Raywin says of the end of that conversation, I don't and wouldn't trust a conscience vote. Yeah, I mean, when you do think about it though, if it went to a conscience vote and everyone from ACT and everyone from New Zealand First voted to put this into law, you would have to have 43 out of 49 National Party MPs vote for it on the conscience vote. It's so hard making absolute statements in this current climate. I would assume that there's going to be more than 6 National Party MPs that would not vote for it. So if 6 voted against it and 43 did, it could go through. But if 7 voted against it, they wouldn't have the numbers to go through. Josie says, I would prefer we didn't have civil disturbance. Belfast says, don't risk a Brexit vote. And Claire says, this reminds me of Brexit, populism and lies. Yeah. And you know what happened after Brexit? And it's still happening now. All the people who were warning the UK about what Brexit would be have been proven right. And all the people who voted for Brexit purely as a protest vote, the day after they were like, what? What do you mean it passed? And there was headlines the world over, remorse and regret from all these people who put it through. And now the UK, just go and listen to UK talk radio. I do it every couple of times a week maybe. The UK is poked, absolutely poked. And a bunch of the money that was coming to the UK companies because they had basically a free trade agreement, the European Union, now companies all through Europe are using other companies within the European Union to provide goods and services to them. And it's been an absolute abomination for the UK, basically making themselves isolated and isolationary, to the detriment of the financial status, I guess, of the UK. But not just that. I mean, people who used to go to Ibiza and retire in Ibiza, it's not part of the EU anymore. You can't do that quite as simply as you used to once do it. Anywho, team, that's us. I have noticed in the chat tonight that there was a bit of argy-bargy, some fireworks on the working group tonight. I don't ever get a chance to see that until the Wednesday morning, so we may do something from that tomorrow night. Just so you know, there was an announcement today, quite late in the day, a letter to Pharmac from David Seymour. I'm paraphrasing from my memory, basically saying that Pharmac has to ignore the Treaty of Waitangi from now on. I've put a request into the Māori Party to come talk to us about that. Obviously, there's Darlene Tana. I've put a request into the Green Party to come and talk about that. And also, whatever happened on the working group, we might have a look at those, because they were talking about Trump, I know, tonight. There was a couple of topics I saw that looked interesting. And I apologise. I'll do it this way. Look, I realised dog cam wasn't set up. Nah. Hey, come here. I'll try and do it this way for you. Come here. Come. Come. Up. Come on. Up. She's not normally allowed to get up, so she's going, why am I allowed to get up? Come up, you come, up. Here we go. I know, because I'm not one of my daughters, am I? Come up, you come. Come say hello to the people. This way, look this way. There we go. Say hello to the people. You okay? You doing all right? So I'm sorry, I didn't have dog cam, but there's dog for you. You want to go back to your bed? Go on, off you go. Good girl. So I apologise, Angie, but there you go. Got a little bit of Nala. We used to do that a lot more. Maybe I'll look to getting it set back up again. And so on the rough days, we can have a little bit of Nala love at the end of the day. All right, team. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. As I said, those 2 interviews will be available on YouTube tomorrow. If you're a patron, they are already there. Remember as well, if you want to win yourself $500, or you know someone who's a muso that might want to win themselves $500, we're looking for a new theme tune to go out on. And if you go to our Facebook page, pardon me, or you go to my Twitter feed, you can see some of the details around that. How you can do that? Basically, make us a new theme tune, and you might win yourself $500.
And sure, pick up the news, big Harry style, keeping it loose. New Zealand, where the politics play, they bring the truth every single day. Talking about the mess all over the land. They shine a light with a mic in their hand. No time for cheese, just facts straight up. Bad and true.
I just took his name out because he's not here.
Never backing up. From the Cape to Bluff, no place too far. They expose the truth and raise the bar. Politicians tremble at their mighty voice. Patting they'll make the right choice.
Yeah, I just took his name out again because he wasn't here. All right, team. Thanks for being with us. Chewy back again tomorrow night from 9 p.m. for another live show of Big Hero News. Thanks for being with us tonight. I appreciate the kind words and appreciate that you enjoyed the actual product we put out tonight. I think that conversation, especially the 35-minute interview around the treaties principles bill, is an important one to have. I noticed some people in the chat saying, why isn't there more media on this? Well, this is what you guys are here for. You can support us by being a patron. You can support us by sharing our stuff around. So if you think that was a good one that other people need to see, share it around. It's on YouTube at 6:30 tomorrow morning. It's on Facebook at 6:30 tomorrow morning. And there'll be some clips coming out from it between tomorrow and Sunday that you can share around as well. If you follow me on Pat Brittenden, at Pat Brittenden on Twitter. All right, team. Love you to bits. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We'll catch you tomorrow night from 9 p.m. Hooroo.